Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on this News 2 special 2012 Year in Review. We take a look back at some of the top stories that have made an impact in the Virgin Islands. In the year 2012, the word LEAC became a household name in the territory as many residents and business owners struggled to survive increasing WAPA energy costs. It was a year that the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority says was one filled with many obstacles, but looks brighter for the territory in the near future. News2's Janisha John takes us on this year's WAPA journey and shows us the future in energy for the territory.
The year 2012 was a year faced with many obstacles for the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority, a year that started out with an all-time blow as the territory's primary energy source learned that they would be losing their fuel source through the announcement of Hovensa's closure.
Definitely was a blow. It was something that we knew from our intelligence that was possible on the horizon, but we still didn't expect it to take place that fast. So when it took place and we found out it was going to happen, it was something we knew had to change the way we've been doing business for decades. For decades, we had a firm supply of fuel.
Hovensa's closure naturally had an impact on fuel costs, causing the increase of WAPA's LEAC that created a burden for many residents and businesses in the territory, as well as forcing WAPA to find an alternative fuel source.
The burden of the energy prices has been there in the territory, and we're well aware that we're very mindful of that. And it's a pain for us to see anybody struggle, business or residential customer. The thing that we lose sight of is that during the closure of Hovensa, there's a lot of talk of WAPA not being able to find a fuel source, and people were saying that, I don't know what's going to happen in January of 2013 if we can't find a fuel source. So we're able to revamp our process and come back with something that we knew was going to work for the territory. We're able to secure a new source. We know the cost was higher, but we knew it was very important to make sure we had a source rather than have no oil and no power.
Amidst finding a new fuel source, WAPA also realized the urgency in finding alternative energy solutions for the territory. Therefore, looking towards liquefied natural and propane gas, solar energy, and other solutions to bring relief as early as 2014.
We also had a successful RFQ for LNG and LPG. And the future is bright. You know, we no pun intended, but the future is bright. We see some relief coming in the horizon, some of it within the next 12 months in 2013. We see that we're going to be able to bring some solar on the grid. We see where biofuels is close to coming to fruition. It's a lot that's going to happen in 2013.
WAPA has a long list of completed projects throughout the year of 2012, such as its underground wire projects and reverse osmosis plant, projects that they hope to continue in the upcoming year to provide an overall better and more cost-effective service to the residents of the Virgin Islands.
There's just so much on the horizon for Water and Power Authority. It's a very exciting time. It's a pain to see any business close, any customer to do without power or struggle. We know that we're working and our efforts are in the right place. We know our hearts are in the right place. We know our will is in the right place, and we know we will succeed for the people of the Virgin Islands.
Janisha John, News 2.
WAPA officials say they are excited about the changes to come in the new year and want to encourage residents to continue to speak out about their energy concerns. Well, the year was truly a life-changing one for many in the territory after the largest employer, Hovensa, announced in January that its refinery would be shutting down and letting over 2,000 employees go. The announcement came after 45 years of operations on St. Croix, a decision that Hovensa officials said had to be made after the refinery totaled $1.3 billion in losses over a 3-year span and was projected to continue its losses due to the global economic slowdown. The refinery also announced that it would maintain the refinery for the remainder of 2012 as an oil storage terminal with 100 employees remaining. The closure has since had a major impact on the territory's financial state, resulting in the initial loss of a fuel supplier for the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority, about $60 million in annual tax revenue for the VI government, as well as affecting real estate, schools, unemployment, and business owners of all types. Despite its harsh blow to the territory, Hovensa took steps to assist its former employees with the transition, many who have since relocated or have received special training to adapt to alternative industries such as tourism. The company also recently agreed to continue its current interim agreement with the government to supply the territory's fuel up until February 28th. While government officials continue to search for a future use for the refinery, a Hovensa spokesman recently stated that Hovensa is continuing to work to achieve an amicable resolution that best serves the interests of both the company and the Virgin Islands. The 2012 election cycle was a controversial one, with a high turnout for candidates seeking a change in leadership. But at the heart of the issue was a small group of individuals who spent countless hours fighting for transparency and accountability. News 2's Erica Bivens continues to investigate and brings us this recap of the 2012 elections.
2012 was a time for change in leadership, as was evident by the amount of candidates who decided to run for office. And that's when much of the controversy began. After the primary elections, multiple challenges were issued to the Board of Elections in both districts. Challenges came from candidates and non-candidates, beginning with concerns about the voting machines.
Some machines as they stand right now are illegal. They are unlawful. They are not certified whatsoever. We should not be using them.
News 2 discovered the current voting machines are not EAC certified, as we were previously told. However, the Attorney General stated it was okay to use these machines, despite local law that requires us to only use EAC certified machines.
They don't have those machines. What are they supposed to do? Not have the election?
Federal law requires us to be HAVA compliant, which includes federal positions being voted on federally certified machines. The delegate to Congress is a federal position, but was not voted on a federally certified machine. Paper ballot voting was also an option this year, which brought up other concerns.
Just as those with the machines have the little tent, there need to be some privacy. There was no privacy. I felt like I was being violated because, as I said, people were walking all around me, the workers and other voters.
But writing concerns to the board seems pointless, according to Krista Schluterman, who says she was denied due process like others, from either being ignored completely or only partially answered.
Any correspondence that is issued to any one of the board members and or the supervisor election tends to be addressed in a board meeting with the putting the item on the agenda and saying, okay, we addressed it. And that's it. That is not due process.
Unanswered challenges from the primaries led to the same ones being raised on Election Day. And in the days that followed also raised new concerns, like why election officials separated paper ballots and why the St. John elections candidate was not in a separate category.
And when you go back to the 2010 election ballot, it shows you where Harry Daniel was the election candidate, and there was an option of writing, and the separation of the St. Thomas versus the St. John ballot was there. In this ballot of 2012, it's not.
Eventually, the AG convened a panel to look into voter complaints with subpoenas issued. Meanwhile, a joint federal audit on how we've spent federal funds also began. But challengers were still not satisfied and demanded a recount. The St. Croix Elections Board denied those requests, but the St. Thomas-St. John Board failed to gather a quorum to even vote on the matter. And it's what led 5 former candidates to file a lawsuit asking for a court order to hold a new election. And now, an amendment to also stop the swearing in of those newly elected. The St. Thomas-St. John Elections Board has been adjourned sine die since November 21st. In the meantime, election staff are in the process of moving to their new location in Lockhart Garden so they can finally be ADA compliant and receive federal funding that's being withheld. For News 2, I'm Erica Bivens.
What does 2013 hold for the election system? You can count on 2 for those updates. So what were the top stories in your opinion? We headed out to ask that question. Here's what some had to say.
The WAPA situation, where they charging the customers them with the high rise of cost of living and the light bill, which they see the oil was burning so much oil that they had to charge the customers and so on. You know you're paying this kind of light bill, $600-700 a month for your light bill, and you customer paying $85-46 a month.
WAPA bill, it's too high.
My mommy's pay cut.
My mommy's pay cut.
The top story for 2012 was the Senate, the money with the Senate that acclaimed was misspent. Yeah, that was the top story for this year.
Welcome back. Difficult economic times from 2011 continued into 2012. The central government made substantial budget cuts that resulted in several government agencies cutting back on employees. And additionally, the Juan Louis Hospital made cuts of their own. News2's Alison Born-Vanek has more on the layoffs and how the response to the terminations were protests territory-wide.
The effects of tough economic times in the territory continued in 2012. After being hit with an 8% cut in salaries in 2011, government employees were on high alert in 2012 when it came to job security. First, the government let go about 500 workers in January. Then the Department of Education slashed 23 jobs on February 23rd. Those jobs included teachers from both school districts.
Individuals were taken out of classes, told that they were dismissed and not allowed to go back to classes in some instances. They were escorted out of the school premises.
The Department of Education would not comment on personnel issues or how many teachers were let go, but a total of 9 education employees were laid off in St. Thomas and 14 on St. Croix. And the reason, according to the Department of Education, had to do with the department's dwindling budget, a budget that had been slashed approximately $18 million from the past year. And after the layoffs came the protests.
Educate or incarcerate. We work hard, we educate them, we spend our personal funds to make sure that they have the resources that they need. And for educators to be sent home, what does that say about how everyone feels about the children, about the impact on the student?
We are here to just make a stance as educators, as professionals. What's going on in the territory is wrong and it needs to stop.
Shortly after the education terminations, the Department of Health fired 18 to 20 health workers from St. Thomas and St. Croix.
This is an ongoing process that has already taken place in many of the agencies and departments of the executive branch. I believe the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, as well as the Department of Education were among the last of the larger agencies of the executive branch that recently experienced their dismissals. But it's an ongoing process.
After those layoffs, budget cuts continued for government agencies as the central government aimed to reduce its budget by $20 million. And while layoffs took place within government agencies, the Juan Louis Hospital in St. Croix was also cutting down its staff. In March of 2012, 85 nurses were let go and protested their terminations.
We will be out here every day until the nurses return to the hospital, and that is our #1 goal.
Our finances today are not in a strong position. We had to make some financial choices.
In addition to finances, Juan Louis Hospital CEO Jeff Nelson said that the hospital was moving toward a magnet status hospital, where patient care is delivered by registered nurses. Meanwhile, on the governmental side, there's no word of more budget cuts are in store for 2013. However, Government House says that reductions in agencies' operating costs remain viable options. For News 2, I'm Alison Born-Vanek.
Government House says that the government continues to monitor expenditures versus revenues and make determinations as to how best to balance both categories. Well, it's been over a year since an audit of the Virgin Islands legislature was released and claimed that more than $6.9 million was mismanaged and lost over several legislatures that included the 26th, 27th, and 28th. Back in February, Senate President Ronald Russell said that the Senate had conducted its own internal investigation and its findings were different than the audit. Back then, he said no funds had been misspent. He also said that the Senate would have a press conference that would reveal the Senate's investigation's findings. However, that never happened. On February 24th, Senator Russell canceled that press conference. The presser would have been an opportunity for Senator Russell to release the names of senators involved in cash advancements or alleged mishandling of government funds. However, he said that due to local and federal investigations, he was not able to release any information. And for months, Senator Russell did not disclose the legislature's internal investigation findings. But in July, he discussed the audit exclusively with News2. He presented a bulletin that addressed the alleged $6.9 million that was misused by making note of 4 renovation projects on legislative buildings that totaled to $4.4 million. The bulletin also reported $1.5 million in bonuses. Additionally, Senator Russell said that many procedures at the Senate had changed, but by October, the VI Superior Court decided the Virgin Islands legislature had to turn over all of the documents that the Virgin Islands Daily News had been requesting since December 2011. And the documents that Senator Russell hadn't disclosed became available to the public. As we continue to take a look back at some of the top stories for 2012, again, we asked some residents what stories and events impacted them the most this year. Here's more.
For me, the top story of the year was the re-election of Barack Obama as president. I think that it marks a very positive, significant historical change, not only for the country, but for this world, as I consider him to be one of the most influential and intelligent people alive today. God bless him, God bless the US of A, and I think the world ought to be thankful that we have this person in this position at this time.
My top story of the year was the re-election of Obama. Thank you.
I would say Obama. I'll be honest with you. You know, I was really into this, presidential race, and it seemed really, really close. You know, as if it was going to be really close, but it turned out, I think, to be something that a lot of people may have expected. You know, that he was going to win. But I had my little doubts, but still he pulled it through.
The top story of the year for me is when Obama won for presidency, because I realized that there still is hope in the US of A.
Welcome back. We are taking a look back at some of the top stories of 2012. Now, the year was one of the more challenging years for the VI Police Department. 6 officers alone were shot in the last half of the year, and the department still has work to do to meet the mandates of a federal consent decree they've been under for the last 4 years. News 2's Erica Parsons takes a look back at the last year.
It's been a little more than 1 year since Henry White Jr. joined the VI Police Department as its top commander, and that time saw many challenges, almost seeing more bad days than good, with armed robberies and major crimes up.
Over the last 6 months, the territory has seen a steady increase in incidents of major crime. As a community, we cannot avoid acknowledging that our efforts to bring perpetrators to justice, our police officers have held their ground.
Held their ground to the point that 6 officers were shot in the line of duty, one of whom eventually died from his injuries.
In May, 2 St. Thomas police officers were shot while pursuing an armed suspect. Officer Colvin Georges died from his injuries, and Officer Aaron Hodge continues to recover from his injuries.
Just weeks later, St. Croix Police Chief Chris Howell and Officer Ellsworth Jones were both shot confronting robbery suspects. Officer Amelie Lockhart was shot in November while chasing an armed robbery suspect in Sunny Isle, and 1 week later, Officer Theodore Willocks was shot while confronting suspects during a home invasion. St. Croix Deputy Police Chief James Paris, who was sworn in this past June, has been the acting chief in Howell's absence. Paris and Commissioner White recently addressed St. Croix business owners to discuss the VIPD's accomplishments and plans to reduce crime. The official said saturated patrols will continue as they have been instrumental in taking weapons and criminals off the streets. This year, the VIPD also continued their partnerships with local agencies to shut down certain operations to help slow illegal activity. White said in the Chamber's meeting and in his end-of-year address that the number of guns coming into the territory is a problem, and since the ports are federally managed, the partnership between local and federal agencies needs to be stronger to stem the flow of imported guns. A major challenge for the department has been meeting the mandates of the federal consent decree they've been under since 2009. The VIPD has failed to meet all their past deadlines, so in July the court ruled that their original expiration of March 2014 could be extended to 2015 with a joint action plan proposed by VIPD and the Department of Justice. It gives them until October 31, 2013 to come into full compliance and maintain that status for a full 2 years for the decree to be lifted. Staff shortages have been another challenge with the recent government pay cuts and officers retiring from the department. White says they will continue to protect the territory's streets, and help from the community is welcome in the following areas: establishing neighborhood watch programs, increasing security at businesses, providing more resources for youth such as employment education and more vocational training, increasing assistance in counseling for families, and having more blue-collar jobs available. Erica Parsons, News 2.
White says he also plans to expand the VIPD's youth programs and unify the police districts. Bill number 29-0347 was coined the Peace Officer Bill, and after 3 years, it finally became law this October. Senator Samuel Sanes was the bill's sponsor, who continued to push for the bill's approval. Many senators expressed conflicting views on the bill, but it eventually passed the Senate in a 9-5 vote. The new law grants the police commissioner authority to extend liability coverage to select federal law enforcement officers on a 1-year basis, although the status can be revoked at any time. Those officers must also undergo cultural sensitivity courses, and going forward, Sanes says he's been in talks with the police commissioner, Henry White Jr.
I am extremely grateful that he is pushing for it. The last time I talked to him, he sounded very optimistic about it. We already have some federal agents here in the Virgin Islands working in collaboration with the VIPD. They are consulting with the federal agencies in terms of doing the necessary work to start initiating this process.
That's all for now. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this News 2 special 2012 Year in Review. We take this opportunity to thank you for following us on CBS TV2, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter with all the latest news, weather, and sports. We look forward to a bright new year. I'm Sandra Gumansing. Good night.